course. Yeah. Hi, thank you guys so much for coming on this beautiful day. I literally landed here. I'm from New York, and I had no idea what that like huge burning ball in the sky was. So it's a very new experience. Okay, this is totally not related to anything we're going to subsequently talk about, but I literally was diagnosed with vitamin D deficiency. You only need 4 minutes of sunlight a day. That's how bad it's been in New York. So I'm happy to be here. And thank you, Jay, so much for agreeing. Jay has been such an he's an amazing writer, and he's also been such a great supporter of mine, and I'm so grateful to him. My first book, Before I Fall, he was the person who blurbed it, so it's all a long, illustrious history. And I worked at Penguin, in the imprint where 13 Reasons Why was first acquired and edited and published.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about that, like, kind of, because this was really cool. So 13 Reasons Why came out in 2007.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like still on the bestseller list.
Yes, it is crazy. It's awesome. Thank you for saying that so that I didn't have to say
Yeah,
it.
exactly. We worked that out in advance.
Yeah. But it's really cool because that was my first book, 13 Reasons Why, and I was excited to have it out there. And I loved when people would ask, a lot of times you speak, and they say, I loved your book, do you have any other books you could recommend? And it's really hard to recommend books because it's, well, what did you like about this? Or what did you like about that book? And then when I got sent Before I Fall to give it a quote, like I think that was one of the first things I said after I read it. I'm like, this is the book that people are like, I knew if they liked my book, they would love that. And I know a lot of you are here mostly for her, so if you love Before I Fall, you'll love 13 Reasons Why.
Not true, false. I mean, that is true, that you will love the book, but yeah, not true.
But it's also cool because you love the book, and I was the author. She was like just coming out with her first book. So it's like, it's really cool to be able to help. I felt like I was helping this other author. Now let me go through something real quick. So 13 Reasons Why came out October 2007. 2008, nothing coming out from us. 2009, nothing coming out from us. Then March 2010, Before I Fall comes out. I'm like, okay, cool, we both have one book out. And then August 2011, Delirium comes out. October, your middle grade book, Lysol and Poe, comes out. And then my next book comes out. And then Pandemonium comes out, and then Spindlers, and then Delirium Stories, and then Requiem, and then Panic. And later this year, you have an adult book.
I do. Oh, yeah. Oops. I have postcards for that. Yeah. Yeah, I need to work on being prolific. That's definitely something. Oh, postcards for my adult book. There's also like a hair tie and a checkbook. This gives you some indication about the rest of my life and how disorganized it is. There's literally tickets in here. Hold on. Oh, blow dry bar, the dry bar. It's great for blow dries. Just letting you know. Anyway, I have postcards. Yeah, I've been writing a bunch, just a little bit.
I'm just saying it makes me feel bad.
Yeah. Oh, I know. That's my goal in life, is just to make you feel. I'm just kidding. I know, but I do want to say also, sorry for the love fest, and we will get into talking about our books, but. You know, it's not necessarily that common to find really successful authors who really do want to help authors when they're starting out. It's you would think that were the case, but there is still, I mean, even though YA tends to kind of have a reputation of being an industry that's very happy-go-lucky and warm and fuzzy, there's still a lot of competition, and there's a lot of busy people, and you're super busy. You travel all the time. Jay was just telling me next year he's doing a 50-state tour. 50 States Against Bullying. And so, you know, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate just like you took the time to come today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. So we are just going to basically talk about our books and some of the craft issues about some of the things that are similar, some of the things that are different. I'm going to talk primarily about Panic, although we are definitely going to leave time for question and answer. We didn't decide on that, but I think yes, right? Yeah. So please feel free to ask me anything, except don't ask me why I ended Requiem the way I did. I just wanted to torture you. I'm just kidding. You can ask me about that if you want. So yeah, we'll get started.
Yeah, so this is weird because I've never interviewed an author before. This is like, we're not interviewing, but asking each other questions that we want to know. And so I came up with this list of questions, and then I just met Lauren right out here, and she's like, you know, you can ask me this or this. I'm like, that was what I already planned. But now it sounds like I had no plan. And
no, you had it written down, so I believe you, yeah.
Well, do you want to describe what Panic is?
Yeah, I should. That's a good idea. Thanks, Jay. So Panic is, first of all, it's a realistic standalone. So for anybody who has read the Delirium Trilogy, it is quite different. It's a big departure, just like the Delirium Trilogy was a big departure from Before I Fall. So it's a return to realism, Because Before I Fall was primarily realistic, even though there's an element of strange supernaturalism to it, because the protagonist basically dies 7 times and relives the last day of her life 7 times. But it takes place in a very contemporary, realistic, Before I Fall, wealthy setting, suburban setting. Panic takes place in a very different kind of setting. It's a small town, primarily rural. It's very impoverished, and it's plagued by some pretty severe social issues. There's, just the kind of social issues that come with people being unemployed, with people being kind of desperate. There's alcoholism, there's drug use, all of that. So the kids are kind of born into this place where there's just not a lot of options, and they're really isolated. So they've invented this game called Panic. And the way that Panic works is they all the kids in school painstakingly assemble a pot of money. They all chip in $1 a day, and payment is actually mandatory in the school. You get, harassed if you don't participate, varying levels of harassment. And at the end of the year, all graduating seniors are eligible to compete in this game, and it's a game of fear. It tests your ability to withstand fear. So there are challenges that these 2 anonymous judges, create over the course of the summer, usually between 5 and 10 of them, and they get increasingly scary. And you have to participate in them and not show any fear, as well as, obviously complete the challenge itself. And Heather and Dodge are the 2 protagonists. Heather is the girl, Dodge is the boy. They don't end up together, so get that thought out of your head. They do have, there is they do have separate romances, but not at all together. And Heather is playing because to her, winning this pot of money, at the end of the year, the person who does all the challenges successfully gets the big pot of money, which usually amounts to about $50,000, because of the $1 a day of every kid for every day that school's in session. And that's for these kids, for anybody that's a lot of money, but for these kids, that represents the chance to start a new life. And so for Heather, she just wants to escape, and Dodge is playing for a different reason. He's playing because he needs revenge. So that's it. That's what it's about. But I should say, the funny thing is it actually the idea for it came from kind of an unlikely place, because it came from actually, even though it's realistic and really gritty in tone and hopefully very suspenseful, I've been getting these fun tweets from people who are like, oh my God, I can't put it down. I'm biting my fingernails to shred. I'm actually panicking. I also then just got a tweet from somebody who was like, please, at Oliver Books, check out my review of your disaster of a new book. I was like, thank you. You seem like a really nice person. Thanks for making sure that I saw this today on Sunday. It's God's Day. Thanks. Anyway, so it's very suspenseful, and there is kind of a grittiness because they're in situations that are really difficult. But the inspiration was from a Grimm's fairy tale that's actually very funny. Like, it's one of the few Grimm's fairy tales that's like a riotous good time. It's called The Boy Who Went Forth to Learn About the Shivers, and the length of the name is perhaps why it didn't really cotton on as much in popularity. But it's basically about this boy who's too, quote-unquote, simple to understand what fear is, what the shivers are. He's like literally too dumb to be afraid. And so he goes on this, he gets kicked out by his father who's ashamed of him, and he comes across this haunted house, and there's a king who decrees that anybody who can, stay in the haunted house for 3 days can marry his daughter, etc., which he manages to do. Anyway, but it did get me thinking about what characteristics would enable somebody, like other than just sheer ingrained courage, what enables some people to withstand fear and tolerate it and even embrace it, and then what prohibits other people from taking risks, or what makes people kind of penned in by their fears. So that thinking was how Panic came to me.
But were you looking through Grimm's fairy tales, looking for an idea to kind of adapt, or?
No. I don't know. I remember, well, I'll ask in a second, but no, I definitely read a lot, especially after I ended the Delirium series. Like, that's the weird thing. I think coming to the end of a book is always scary and hard because, in one hand, it's incredible relief, but, when I finished the Delirium series, it had been years that I'd been living in the same world, years that I'd been living with the same characters. So even though I totally had empty nest syndrome. Like, on the one hand, I did feel like the way parents must feel when their kids go to college. Like, I was like relieved and joyful and also proud and all this stuff. And then, but I also then was like coming back to an empty house being like, this is so scary. What if I never have an idea again? So usually in those times, I really just double up my reading, you know, because I do find inspiration so much from things that I read and experience. And I know that that's true of how you thought of the idea for 13 Reasons Why, right? Because you were at the museum tour. Is that how it came to you?
I did an audio tour, and then at the very end, I thought this would be a really cool structure for a book. To write these two simultaneous narrators, one a recorded voice. And then, but I held on to that.
Well, maybe just in case there's anybody who hasn't read it, which is unlikely, maybe you should tell them what that's about. Yeah.
So 13 Reasons Why, which if you like Before I Fall, you'll really like that book. So it starts with this junior, Clay Jensen. He comes home from school and he finds a package addressed to him on his doorstep. And inside are 7 audio cassettes, and their sides are labeled 1 through 13. And eventually he finds a way to play tapes, puts in the first tape, presses play, and out comes the voice of Hannah Baker, a classmate of his who 2 weeks earlier committed suicide. And she says that on each side of each tape, she's going to tell the story of somebody at her school who she feels led her to that decision. And if you received the box of tapes, you're one of the reasons why. And so, yeah, I had the idea for the audio tour structure for years.
Right.
But I thought it was such a cool idea.
Well, because then afterwards, the point is that the narratives change.
Between the recorded voice and the person,
and
like the thoughts of somebody listening. But I thought it was such a cool structure, I didn't want to waste it as a gimmick. You know, so I held on to it until the right story came where it enhanced whatever that story is. And so, and then once I came up with the subject matter, I thought, yeah, that's the perfect way to tell that story. And then it's fun, like it's almost like a puzzle to put stories together that feels natural, even though it's coming from, you know, you're trying to put all these fake things and make it feel real.
Well, and so people have been asking me like how I have gotten into the mind of a teenage boy, which, you know, I just tell them, well, I just lose 40 IQ points because men are so simple. No, just kidding. But did you find, I mean, how did you, because the voices are really differentiated. Clay's voice and his experience and Hannah's are very, and also, oh no, they're both first person point of views. But did you find that you ever like were lapsing too much towards a singular voice? How did you work on distinguishing it, and how did you get into that female voice? that I'm glad to hear that you get asked that about being a boy, because I get asked a lot how to get into the mind of especially a teen female. Yeah. And like the voice just came to me, and I'd love to hear about how you develop your characters, because especially with that book, I didn't develop them. Like the idea came to me, and the characters were so strong. I had never tried writing from a female perspective, and so once I wrote about 10 pages, I had my wife read it to see, am I just totally off base? Yeah. And she told me, your job now is to not question it, and if she's speaking to you that clearly, just go for it. And after I was finished, I kind of came up with this philosophy that I don't think males and females are that different in how we think. I think how we react to things, our society tells us, you know, what's appropriate, and it's a little different, but I think our emotions are actually very similar. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I really feel that way too about, it's like when people say like, oh, do you spend a lot of time with teenagers trying to capture their voice? And I'm like, well, it would be really creepy if like a 31-year-old woman who doesn't have her own kids would just be like, hey guys, do you want to hang out? Like, no. Being a 38-year-old balding man. True, fact. But I mean, and even, you know, I've written middle grade stuff too, and there the narrators are 10, 11, 12. And I mean, first of all, you know, to a certain extent, yes, I've gone through those ages. But like in my adult book, one of the narrators was born in 1918. So, you know, obviously is a lot older than I am. Hopefully you guys know that. You know, I think that it is true that fundamentally, like what people want, I totally agree with you. Our reactions to things can be informed by, are informed and shaped a large part by expectations, both familial and societal and stuff. But I think that what people fundamentally want is largely the same. Yeah. Like basically at every age. And oops, I forgot to turn off my phone. Sorry, guys. But my ringtone's so cute. Just kidding. And so, but there are things. I do think it's more like how to just. I mean, so much of character work is, like you said, it's unconscious. But there are times where I think in my second draft I had to go through and make sure that they were distinct enough, because I also as a writer have a voice, like a particular habits and stuff like that I go to. I like to describe trees a lot. I can be long-winded. So I have to make sure that Dodge doesn't sound the same Heather. Did you have to do editing of that?
No,
I remember the hot dog scene you had to edit.
Yeah, there were several things I had to edit because my humor was a little too strong in some cases.
So yeah.
But yeah, were you, and that's,
Yeah.
I always think you don't want, when somebody's reading your book, you never want them to think of you.
Right.
And so when my editor was going through it, that's where a lot of the things she was pointing out were, this took me out of the story. It made me think, oh, why did he put that in there?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, whether it's toning it down or it's too precious of something to you, so you wanted to keep it in there, but it feels precious, so then it just makes them think of the writer.
Mm-hmm.
But Panic is in third person,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's from, like, every
points of
chapter
view,
is from a different person's perspective. Why did you decide, one, to do two perspectives, but then as opposed to doing because a lot of YA is in first person?
Yeah, well, there were reasons. So the first thing about why it was split, well, first of all, I thought it was going to be, originally, I had more than two points of view, because as I said, the idea kind of came from a psychological question I asked myself about fear and the nature of fear and the nature of, our ability to withstand fear. So I originally had this section called Voices, in which I wrote points of view for almost every single character who was participating in the game, because I really wanted to figure out what were the unique sets of circumstances that led, each of those people to those decisions.
A fairy just got its wings.
Yeah, exactly. And then over time, as I kept writing, I kept gravitating more towards Heather and Dodge. Originally, I also had a point of view. For a long time, I had one more point of view that remained, which is Nat, Heather's best friend, girlfriend, who's also competing in Panic. I wanted to show that dynamic really interested me, these two girls who were best friends and who were competing, but not over a man, which has been done, but over a goal that really feels valuable to both of them. And I ended up, it wasn't working. She needed to go, but as a point of view character, she's still in the book. But I also wanted Dodge and Heather. I wanted the reader to be in the uncomfortable position of wanting both of the people to win for different reasons, and not really having. And having to kind of face a couple of then moral questions that come along with that. And the third person point of view, honestly, after writing Before I Fall and the Delirium series, which were all in first person, I was so sick of it. I felt like I was being held hostage to these characters' feelings. I was like, I don't care how fast your heart is beating. I don't want to know. I almost feels a little bit more claustrophobic to write in first person. And the book I'm working on now, that's coming out next spring,
I don't have a book.
Not making me feel bad. Is also it's return to the first person. That book I tried to write a little bit in third person and I couldn't, because it's actually so contingent on perspective and identity and a sense of identity that I felt it needed to be. I mean, some books just demand, just like the same way that a character will speak to you in a certain way, some books kind of demand to be written, I think, one way or the other. So that was kind of my motivation.
This is something I've noticed in your writing, which it's one of the reasons that I love your writing, is you'll have a certain story element that would lend itself to being something we've seen a bunch, but then you don't go there. As far as, when I first started reading Panic and I saw, okay, we're switching characters, it was like, okay, this is a really natural book because you have all these people competing to get into several heads.
Right.
But it's much, when you can root for a smaller group and really get into their heads, it just makes the book more personal. And the same thing you said about these two, because I think you would naturally think there's going to be some sort of romantic relationship between them.
Yeah.
And then there's not. You're like, oh cool, so this is different. Like, you're thinking creative as opposed to just,
I bet you didn't expect the tigers either. No,
there's a Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
The pig? That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, so I have a question for you, because I feel like this is also similar in both. Well, I actually have a question for you about 13 Reasons Why, and then I have a question for you about Future of Us. But one thing that I think is similar in 13 Reasons Why and Panic is that, and I don't know whether this was deliberate on your part, so in both of our books, they take place in really small towns. I mean, they're very different, but because your protagonist is moving around while he's listening to the audio, it actually becomes almost like a secondary character, and also there are important seminal things that have happened in Hannah's life in each of these places. So it becomes almost like a third character in the book. Was that deliberate, or were you just trying to give him action?
Cool, because I wanted to ask you about the small town thing.
Yeah.
And this is what's weird. So you guys live in LA. It's a big area. I actually grew up in Arcadia up and through 7th grade, and then I moved up to San Luis Obispo, where I live now. And that town is about 46,000. I never saw that as a small town, but of course when you're editing this book with people who live in New York City, they think of it as a small town,
Yeah.
so I never thought of it that way. And then Ben, my publisher, said, you know, that was one of the things in the editing, he wanted more of a sense of the small town. I was just writing about my town.
Right.
And that's just where I thought this kind of should be set. Partly because of the going around, walking around town, you know, it just felt something like a parent would let their kid do more in a town that size. And so yeah, in Panic, it being a small town, which this town was like 14,000 people, 12,000, so even smaller. And one of the things when I was reading it, I was thinking, you know, this could happen in a big town too, but it totally would have changed the feel of the book, because right now, everybody at the school knows this is going on. I think if it happened in New York City or something, it would almost have even more of an underground feel. Like not all the kids would have known about it, just a small group. And I think it just has a cooler feel when you know all the teens in the community know about this, but are kind of hiding this.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, you know, partly that's based on my sense of, well, and there are two things I want to say. First of all, at an event I did a couple of days ago, the moderator was like, you know, it's funny, like I think, you know, when I think of small towns, I think most people think of a real sense of community, and I think of like, you know, a lot of kindness and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, this small town has all these problems. And I just kind of felt like, well, anybody who really believes that about modern small towns, like really has never lived in a small town. Because, I mean, there's such claustrophobia in a certain way, and also, you know, it's just this, I don't know, I mean, my feeling of high school and where I lived was, first of all, there was a lot of desperation to escape, even though we weren't in the kind of town that's represented in CARP. But people were just, you know, as a teen, you have no power, you have no agency, you can't really go anywhere, you have no money, and like, your life is being completely run by people you may or may not think are total idiots, and they may or may not be total idiots, who knows? I mean, you know, certainly Heather's mom is in this book. And they want out, and they want to do things, and they want to party, and they want to, like, you know, have adventures and just, you know, escape themselves for a little bit. So a lot of that was in the book, and a lot of the sense of, like, in my book, like, when I was a teen, I really had a sense that there were two worlds, and, like, my friends and I, and our, like, teen world was one, and then, like, there were adults, and, like, I had no idea what they were doing, and I didn't really care. And I do feel like that's a theme too in 13 Reasons Why, and that's actually partly, you know, the heartbreaking scene where Hannah finally does reach out to the guidance counselor, but the guidance counselor is so kind of dismissive and stuff like that about events that were really critical and urgent in her life.
Do you get this question? I get it pretty much every stop I go, especially when I'm at schools. I think twice in all the stops I've heard this from a teen, but it's always from adults. Where were the parents? Where were the adults in the story? And you just summed it up perfectly.
Yeah.
When you're that age, you do have two worlds. They're just as real, but you know, and I think adults think they're more of their teens' lives than it feels like when you're a teen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for a parent too, I mean, it makes sense, because for a parent, you know, your kids are your life. I mean, and they're not your whole life, obviously, but they are. I mean, you're responsible for them, and you care so deeply about them, and your well-being is so intricately wrapped up in their well-being. But, you know, as a teen, the adolescent years are when you go from being a child, where your parent is at the center of your world, to breaking free of that. If people didn't break free of that, they would never leave home. They would always be dependent on their parents. So, like, you have to sometimes go through these upheavals where you're completely going off in another direction, but that's also terrifying and lonely, and bad things happen, and, like, you know, that's definitely a theme in a lot of my books, because that was certainly my adolescent experience. It's not everybody's, but that was mine. And that's also why I put Anne, the character of Anne. There's a character in Panic who Heather kind of ends up working for. That's where the tigers come in. But that's probably the first time in my life where I was thinking about that, because I've gotten that question so much. But also it would have been too Heather needed that redemption. She needed also to know that there were good adults out there who would love her and would care about her, because I mean that is true. But yeah, no, I definitely think the separation of those worlds is really, really true and accurate. And was that deliberate when you did that in 13 Reasons Why, or was that just your perception?
Well, I deliberately didn't put the parents in because I didn't want anybody to dismiss the 13 reasons that Hannah was talking about. I thought, like, if I gave her a bad home life, people would have said, none of this other stuff would have mattered if she had a better home life. And one thing I was really curious about with Panic, and I don't know if you want to describe what some of the challenges they have to do, or if it would be a spoiler too much, because, and I don't know if you mentioned this, but not everybody at the school has to do these challenges.
Right. Well, it's only, you choose to compete.
If you want to compete for this money.
Yeah.
And some of these things are really terrifying. Would you have participated?
Okay, so this is really funny. So I was talking about this, and I was like, oh yeah, totally, I would have played Panic, I would have won, I'm like fearless, and then my friend was like, yeah, unless they tried to make you eat a banana, because I'm terrified of bananas, and there's a scene for promotion, so I did 2 things to promote Panic. One was, I was like, oh, I'll go skydiving, went by myself, couldn't get a friend to go with me, I was like, oh yeah, sure. Went up on 10,000 feet, was like, as soon as the door opened, I was like, okay, I'm going. I wasn't clipped in yet, okay? The guy was like, what are you doing, okay? Went skydiving, there's a video of it, we're releasing it soon, it's great, had the best time ever. Then Harper called me in, my publisher, and they wanted me to eat a banana. And it's also on YouTube. I don't want to give it away, whether I succeeded or not, but it was the most traumatic experience of my life, and it almost killed me.
So I want to go out to lunch with you after this.
And force me to meet banana. So wait, my question is, so in Panic 2, there's group challenges, which are mostly in the early part of the game, and then as more and more people get winnowed out, there are like individual challenges you have to do, and you know, you better hope that at no point ever in your entire life have you expressed fear to anybody about what really makes you afraid, because they will like have used it in the game. So my question is, what would your individual challenge be?
I have no idea, because it might become part of your marketing. And I
Right, exactly, I'll force you to do it. No, come on.
I totally would have
You
participated in Panic.
Yeah?
I totally would have, because I thought I was invincible. I still think I'm invincible.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could do great in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could win. I think I would win.
But I don't know that you're scheming enough and
I'm not
mean
scheming enough. I'm not competitive.
Yeah.
At all.
So you were just like deathly terrifying
Yeah,
things
I've
just
done
because you're not
skydiving.
competitive? Oh, you have?
Yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah, I loved
Okay.
it. I loved
Yeah,
it. I
it
would
is
totally
fun.
do it again.
It is fun. So you have no fears? Not even of any fruits? Or vegetables?
Kumquats.
Really?
Just the name. Like,
I
what
know.
who calls it a
I know, it's
kumquat?
true. It's like, it's an alien thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch topics slightly and talk about Future of Us, which you wrote with Carolyn Mackler, who's amazing. So I'm writing
We both gave a quote for Before I Fall.
Oh yeah,
right?
you did. Yeah. I know, it's my 2 favorite people. So I'm writing a book series with somebody now, and I wanted to know how you guys split up the writing, and what the experience was like of working with. Because you guys did. There's a boy and a girl, and you guys did, each POV, right?
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, I had never ever considered, I didn't think I would be able to write with another author. Because I'm so particular, as most authors are, about word choice. Like, it has to be perfect, how I see perfect. And so I didn't think I would ever be able to give up the reins even a little bit to work with somebody. When Carolyn approached me to work with it, she was always one of my favorite authors. I was going through kind of writer's terror after 13 Reasons Why, where I wasn't writing anything. I was just afraid to have a follow-up book. Mm-hmm. So when she approached me, the only reason I said yes was because I knew if people didn't like it, they would blame her. Yeah, blame Carolyn. So
that is so great.
So
You're such a gentleman.
But 40 points dumber.
Yeah.
Than Carolyn. She is very smart. But anyways, I never felt dumb. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's okay. So we both are total control freaks as far as story with me and Carolyn. And so we decided we wanted to brainstorm the entire thing so that everything that happens, we both thought, yeah, that's the perfect thing to happen. And then just for the sake of divvying up the workload.
Did you brainstorm in person? Or
no, on the phone. She lives in New York. It was all on phone and email. And so I would write the first draft of the male character, and she would write the first draft of the female character, both knowing what was going to happen in those chapters. And then we would swap the chapter, and then we each had free reign to do whatever we wanted to that chapter, to what we felt was make it better, and then without telling the other author what we were doing. We would just make the changes and then send it back. And then we kept sending it back and forth, and some of the chapters, I think the most number went back and forth 26 times before we both went, yes, that's the perfect chapter. And then we did when we finished the book, we went through and I edited the whole book, and then she edited the whole book, and then we just kept going until we both.
Was there any like particular sticking point where you just kept changing like a certain word or image back and forth and back and forth?
We had some arguments because it's about seeing your future on Facebook, and then making changes now and going into and then seeing if it's rippled into a better future for yourself. And our main, is anybody putting this on YouTube? Okay. So our main thing we couldn't figure out was the concept of sperm. So because my feeling was, even the most minute change today, even if you have a conversation, so you leave your house 5 minutes later, which means you're going to get to a stoplight that otherwise would have been green, and then you would have met this person earlier. And maybe this person would have cut you off. Maybe you would have gotten into a rear end, and we're in collision. Yeah. Sorry. And,
like, what are we talking about?
I just thought it would change.
Sorry.
It would change absolutely everything, and you would have different children. Like, no matter what, every single time you went online, you would have a different.
Oh, interesting.
Different children. If you're looking 15 years into the future.
Oh, interesting.
And Carolyn didn't think that time was that delicate. So I'm like, okay, well, if you have sex at this time as opposed to this time,
right?
I had to look up how many. I'm like, this one instead of this. Anyways, yeah.
That's
you know
amazing.
what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
I'm not to say it.
That's amazing.
That was our main thing. We just were.
Well, it's so crazy to work with somebody because all writers' working styles and processes are so different. I mean, even if you're roughly the same, it's different, and writers are also just such a prickly bunch. And it's funny because, like, so I'm writing a middle grade book series right now with my dad. So first of all, one thing that's really interesting that I learned from Delirium Trilogy is not that I would never write a series again or a trilogy, which I'm writing, but that, like, I wanted to write all 3 books, all the books in the series before the first one comes out. Partly to shelter myself from the, like, I will kill you if you don't bring Alex back kind of things, but also because that way you can make sure that everything links up exactly how you want it to link up before you have anything out in the world, like every little detail. So that I learned. So anyway, I'm working on a book series with my dad. Funny thing about my dad is he is a non-fiction writer about serial killers, so he does very different stuff. This is a middle grade series, and it's not about serial killers at all. It's a wonderful book, and it was his idea, basically. He'd originally conceived of it for TV, for like a grown-up TV series, because he's one of these people with like a million ideas. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't really see that for TV or for adults. It's a little hokey, but I think it would make an amazing middle grade series. So we started working on it. But my dad and I are so different in how we write. My first drafts are horrible. They're like illegible to everybody but myself. Half of the character names are like demarcated by TK, which is a quick way of searching afterwards to replace because there's no words that in the English language, no words have T followed by K, so you can search for it really easily. But
I could never figure out why people did that. That makes so much sense.
I know. I was always like, that's not how you spell like to come, guys. You know, because it's used in editing to be like, this has not been decided.
Technical knockout.
Yeah.
So if you're writing about boxing,
exactly. That's true. Or Justin Timberlake. Anyway, so my dad, and then I just edit the whole thing afterwards, like several times until it's in good shape. My dad never gets past a sentence unless it's perfect. So he will go back to the same sentence again and again. And he is such a meticulous writer that he never does editorial passes, like after his draft is done, like it's done. But so I do all the writing. He does like a lot of the plotting, or most of the plotting, then I do the writing, and then he edits. But his edits to me are so funny. He's like, is this a joke? Like multiple question marks. Like he's like, you used this exact word 200 pages ago. Are you doing this to mess with me? It's so crazy. Like he really thinks I'm just like, I've used the word sunshine twice in a book because I'm being redundant and trying to mess with him. It's so amazing. So it's made me a lot, I mean, it has challenged me as a writer, and it's made me actually, I think, a lot better. things that I used to be like, who cares? Like, it's roughly the same image. But people will have forgotten by the time they get to page 200. I'm like, no, can't have even like close to the same metaphor, can't have. So, but it's hard. It was a challenge. I mean,
that actually was kind of fun because she would point out certain words that I use. And I'm like, well, no, not everybody uses it that often. Like, I don't remember what she said about me, but I know with her, and I'll tell you. So, like, she uses, like, the character shrug a lot.
Yeah.
And so, to me, there are certain words that I never use in my books because when I see shrugging, I'll read them in somebody else's book and just go right over, I know what they're talking about. But for some reason, whenever I think of the word shrug, I think like this really big, dramatic thing. And so I'd be like, all these characters like should go see a doctor because they're all going like this all the time. So I don't think there's any shrugs in that book. That for me, it had to come out.
No, it's so true. You get into weird patterns of writing. Like in every book I've had, it's not conscious, but like you'll get into a thing where a word gets stuck in your head and you don't realize it, and so you're just completely overusing it. I think it's in Pandemonium, or maybe it's in Delirium. Like everything spins. Like everything spins. It's like, I mean, some things spin that should, but like, the world's always feeling like it's spinning. And then there's like the spinning of the bicycle wheels, fizzing of the pavement, like everything's spinning. And then like, after I wrote the Delirium series, I was like, I'm never mentioning a heart again. I'm never mentioning how fast a heart is beating, like ever, or how loud it's beating. And then all in panic, my editor was like, you know that like everyone's stomach hurts all the time in this book, don't you? I'm like, but they're all afraid. She's like, I don't care, cut it.
That's what, in editing 13 Reasons Why, actually, my editor said, my character of Clay, he's constantly like pressing against his head.
Yeah, but he's also listening. I could see that.
Yeah, I know,
he's
right?
listening intently.
But
Come on, Kristen Pettit.
But it makes sense because he was always like, or leaning his head against something. Because it was like he had this so much pressure going on, like all this stuff he was hearing about, and it was way to visibly show that.
Right.
I had to cut out most of the
Exactly. I know. So should we take some audience questions?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, I was listening to the audiobook